I left you not a couple of weeks ago, but 5 months ago in Esther chapter 2, discussing King Ahasuerus, which is where we're going to begin the first place this evening. So if you'll open your Bible there, I want to tell you a story as we go through this. And I want to show you in telling you that just how interesting history can be for the student of the Bible.
Hallelujah.
I found it to be so. We're going to show you some things in discussing here in the intertestamental period. Remember, we haven't actually gotten down to the intertestamental period, but we're headed in that direction. Thankfully, we're not headed in the opposite direction back towards Moses or something, or we'd never get through. But we're headed there. We're talking about the Persian kings. Now, by the way, you're also going to need the chart that we've been using, your Kings and Prophets chart, which I think will come in handy. Well, I don't think, I know. You can follow these things a lot better when you've got them before you. Unless you make up your own homemade chart, and why do that when someone sent this to the printer to have done for us?
Praise God.
The Achaemenid line of Persian kings. We discussed Assyria and her role in the nation of Israel to begin with, which is not that important with regard to intertestamental period. We could spend more time there. We could spend more time with the kings of Assyria. We could spend more time with the battles that were fought. We could spend more time with the fall of Samaria in 722 BC than we did, but we don't need to in a class like this. Nor, in the second place, does a considerable amount of time need to be spent with Babylon. But afterwards, when we came down to Astyages, 585 to 550, we're beginning to get into some important material, because really the beginnings to the intertestamental period can be traced back to the fall of Judah and the return of the exiles. That's building up. We're going to have the fight between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids when we get down into the Greek period and our discussions there. And all of that's been prefaced by the Medo-Persian Empire. So we've discussed what I believe 5 kings thus far. Cyrus the Great, he's the Cyrus of Isaiah 44 and 45, and he's the Cyrus the Great of Ezra chapter 1. We did an interesting study with regard to Gubaru, Darius the Mede. Why was that important? Well, Darius the Mede, named as such, is found nowhere outside the Holy Scriptures. And so, who is this character in the book of Daniel? Well, the critics say he's nobody. He doesn't exist, which proves the conservative claim of the inspiration, or our view of the expiration of Scripture, is not true. Because how can you have someone who's king of Babylon who's not even named in records anywhere? Well, you remember we went through that. He was not king of Babylon. He was a satrap that was appointed over the province of the Chaldeans. Daniel 9:1, Daniel 5, Daniel 6. We looked at that under Cyrus. You understand that? You understand a lot. Hopefully you know that now. Cambyses, he was the first of, well, the elder of 2 important sons of Cyrus. Cambyses, we discussed him and his expedition into Egypt. What happened to Cambyses? Well, he got stuck down there until another Persian, Gamata, all of this is provided for you on your chart, assumed the throne falsely. I mean, it was illegal, but he did it anyway. You don't ask someone's opinion to assassinate someone or to take over the throne while they're gone. And he assumed the name Bardidya. Why Bardidya? Because Bardidya was the younger brother of Cambyses, which had been killed by Cambyses upon the death of Cyrus when Cambyses took the throne. Why the other name Smerdis? Because that's his Greek name. And we're going to get into these swapping around of names again here in a moment when we return to our discussion of Ahasuerus, where you've got a Persian name, which I didn't give you before. It was too long, but I brought it this evening. Well, no one applauded on that, so I'll go on. And his Hebrew and his Greek name as well. Smerdis. We said you should have pseudo-Smerdis. I don't have it on my chart, but you should have on yours, because maybe I can remember it a little easier. Pseudo-Smerdis, that's the Greek name of Bardidya, but this fellow named Gamata is not Bardidya. He just took that name because if you've got some other name and you're not in the Achaemenid line of Persian kings, who's going to accept you on the throne back in Susa whenever Cambyses is stuck down in Egypt? And so the Greeks refer to this individual as Smerdis. Darius Hystaspes. He appears in Ezra, 4 to 6, and Haggai and Zechariah. We looked at that. And that brings us down. And Darius, as far as his claim to be legally descended in the Achaemenid line of Persian kings, that's a little questionable. But the next king, there's no question about it. The great king Ahasuerus, better known by his Greek name Xerxes, practically unknown by his Persian name Xerxes. Xerxes. K-H-S-H-A-Y-A-R-S-H-A. Xerxes. And Ahasuerus is a fairly good skipping from the Persian to the Hebrew language. It might not look like that in English, but it's fairly good. Xerxes. K-H-S-H-A-Y-A-R-S-H-A. Unknown, I said, by his Persian name, better known by his Greek name Xerxes, but maybe to the student of the Bible better known as Ahasuerus, although whoever reads books like Esther, who can pronounce the word that long? Now, the name Xerxes doesn't appear in the Bible. The name Xerxes does not appear in the Bible. The name Ahasuerus occurs in 3 books. It occurs in the book of Daniel, then in the book of Esther, giving them to you at least in the order of the authors, and then in the book of Ezra. In the book of Daniel, chapter 9, verse 1, Ahasuerus appears as the father of Darius the Mede. However, we don't know exactly, now there are some guesses, but we don't know exactly any details about this Ahasuerus of Daniel 9:1, except to say that he couldn't be the Ahasuerus of the other 2 books of the Bible, nor the one that we'll be discussing this evening. He appears, I said, in Ezra chapter 4 and verse 6. Now, I checked out some references on this, and I was a little surprised to find that many people are saying that the Ahasuerus of Ezra 4 and verse 6. Now, remember, Ezra is really coming after this time, but the autobiographical portion of his book doesn't start until over in chapter 10. He's really reviewing what's taken place prior to this, which makes, as we've already taught you before, some of these details in chapter 4 a little confusing when you're trying to put things in order. You're wondering how they could be placed in order. But if you look in chapter 4 and verse 6, some people are saying that this is really a reference to Cambyses. It fits better chronologically as Cambyses. But that's not the name. The Hebrew doesn't even approach being Cambyses. It's just that if you're going to take this as the Ahasuerus, which I do, of the book of Esther, then you're going to have to isolate verse 6 from the whole chapter. Because getting down there in verse 10, you're talking about, the middle of the 7th century BC. Even in verse 5, you're talking about back in the end of the 6th century. And the same is true towards the end of this chapter, verses 23 through 24. But if we're talking about the same Ahasuerus in verse 6 as in the book of Esther, we're not talking about the beginning of the 7th nor the end of the 6th, but the beginning of the 5th century, which would be around 486 BC. And that's what makes it a little confusing. In other words, why have verse 5? They hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus. Cyrus, when did Cyrus reign? Well, he starts independently in 550. We don't count that because we generally count it with regard to the fall of Babylon. Now, if Babylon falls in 539, then the first year of the reign of Cyrus, with regard to what we're concerned about, would be 538. Now, when we're talking about the problems with the temple, you're going to move it 2 years further, which would be 536. Even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Now this is Darius Hystaspes, not Darius the Mede, which is around 521, or 520. He begins in 521, then around 520. And then by the time you get to verse 10, we're talking about Ashur-nippel. Well, that doesn't even relate to the Medes or the Persians. We're going way back to the beginning of the 7th century BC. So what about this little verse 6? In the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. Now you know about Tatnai in the book, and you know about Sanballat in these books of Ezra and Nehemiah. You know the problems that the exiles have. Well, the exiles are coming back 538, and they're starting on the temple in 536, and there's a break in it, and they're finishing it, or they're resuming it in 520, they're finishing it in 516. We're talking about Ahasuerus 486. The temple's already completed, everything's over with. What about these letters, these accusations that are being written back to the king in Persia when everything's already been finished and accomplished in Israel? Doesn't make a lot of sense. So they try to stick the name Cambyses in there. And that fits a little better, but that's not the name in the Hebrew. So you would have to make a textual emendation and change the name in the Hebrew from Ahasuerus to Cambyses, which I don't really think is necessary. We've got to remember that it's not an anachronism because Ezra, whether we're talking about Darius or Ashur-banippel or Cyrus or Cambyses or Ahasuerus, Ezra is coming after that time. So it's not like we've got a problem he's writing about someone who hasn't even come on the scene yet. Now that would be a problem then. We're going to have to assume some scribal emendation or an anachronism or whatever you want to call it. But we don't have a problem because Ezra's coming on the scene a few decades after this. So all of that spill was about the fact that I believe, and I don't think there's any way you can contradict it with any evidence behind it. You can say anything you want to. But without evidence behind you, it doesn't mean a lot. That what we have here is a reference to the same Ahasuerus that we're talking about, and that's found over in the book of Esther, which is where we need to turn now. So Ahasuerus, sometimes we'll refer to him by that name, since that's the Hebrew name, or that's the Anglicized form of the Hebrew name. Why introduce a fourth name and give you the real Hebrew? We've already given you three. And sometimes as Xerxes, since he's better known. Now, as I said to begin with, I want to begin telling you a story. We're going to go probably into more detail about Xerxes because the history is so well documented, as well as his son Artaxerxes, that we'll be getting to shortly, by the Greek historian Herodotus, or Herodotus, if you want that pronunciation. It's rather reliable, the information that we're given, assuming that the reader of the material of Herodotus has enough common sense as well as enough historical background to determine where Herodotus is exaggerating and where he's not. And I'll give you a clue on how to determine that here in a moment. But I said I want to tell you a story in going into more detail about Ahasuerus to show you just how interesting the Bible can be. Yes, how relevant history can be. Whenever you study the Bible, you let other people say what they want to, and they will, whether you let them or not. They'll say it anyway. What they want to about history, what they want to about facts, what they want to about statistics. I'll stay my way because I'm finding people falling left and right because they don't know anything. So it helps to have some knowledge, it helps to know some things, and then you'll open a book like Esther, and as I'm going to show you, and we're not teaching the book of Esther tonight, remember that, because we're going to have to leave you hanging halfway through, since we aren't teaching the book. But then when you open the book of Esther and begin to read, this first and second chapter particularly becomes so interesting and becomes so important, and you understand so much more about them. So, our chart tells us that Xerxes, we've talked about the death of Darius the First, Darius the Great, Darius Hystaspes, ascends to the throne in 486. Now, we're going to give you a few of these dates because the Bible gives us dates, and the book of Esther is going to talk about the such and such year of the reign of Ahasuerus. So if you know when he began, 486, then we can help ourselves in determining when the book of Esther is speaking of. So 486. Now, do you see again on your chart that Vashti was disposed of in 483, 3 years after he came to the throne? And then, you see, this is really a biblical chart, because we don't have 480, which should be on here. But if it's a biblical chart, then you're assuming that people who read it don't know anything. And so you give them what's in the Bible, 486, 483. Now we know Esther's becoming queen, 478. But I'll call your attention to the span of time that elapsed between when Vashti was put off from the throne and Esther assumed it. Why? 483. It's the end of Vashti as queen of Ahasuerus. Why didn't he pick Esther the next year? Someone says, oh, it's because they had this little trial where they got all the beautiful virgins. That's right, but that only took a year. We're still going from 483 to 478. Why did he get rid of Vashti? Or to ask a better question, why... I almost told too much when I stated the question. Why did he pick Esther? Now, I'm not saying Esther, Hadassah, I'm not saying a Jew over a Persian or over a Mede, but why pick anyone? Why have this little game that Esther 2 is all about? With these beautiful virgins, these maidens that are picked out of all the kingdom and perfumed and prettied up, and then brought before him to see which one pleases him the most. We know that God has worked things out, and Esther herself says later on in the book, I believe that I've come to the kingdom for such a time as this, which has become a famous quotation and statement ever since. She was in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing is what she meant. That's a contemporary form of saying what she said, I've been brought to the kingdom for such a time as this. Of course, we know God's raising this up, but the Bible, as well as the author of the Bible, God does not work in a vacuum. He works in history. You understand history, and you'll understand some more of these things behind it. Okay, 478. Then, 4 years later, in 473, the Feast of Purim. Then 464 is not that important with regard to the Bible. He has to give us that to give us the beginning of the reign of Artaxerxes, not that the end of the reign of his father was that important. Okay, with that, let's start with verse 1. Okay, now you've got Esther 478. 479, 78, somewhere along there. We'll stay with what he's got there. And it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. Now think if you just open your Bible and read that, and you've never been to church, you've never been here before, what are you going to do with something like that? What in the world is that thing in the Bible for? That is the one reason, dear friends, why people don't know their Old Testament. They don't read their Old Testament. They don't read it because, what does this mean? I want to find out how to get saved, how to live a holy life, how to get filled with the Spirit, how to get healed, how to get prosperous. It came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. How about the days of Jesus or the days of Paul? Is what I'm interested in. It came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. It's not like so many people out there in the religious world are. They try to extract whatever spiritual from whatever's going on, and then you're going to misinterpret the true spiritual things that either were or are there. This is Ahasuerus. Now he's giving us the geographical extent of his kingdom, parenthetically, which reigned from India even unto Cush. It was called Cush then. It's called Ethiopia today. But it's the same general area. From India. Now you know where India is. We're going to really be looking at some maps tonight. It's good if you take a class in geography over at the college or something so you can learn these things. India to Cush, which is a long, long way. Covers Sinai Desert, over right to the, it covers the Arabian Desert. It's over to the beginning of the Sahara Desert. Over in 120 satrapies or provinces, over which would be a satrap. That in those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, which is right here. This is the Greek form, Susa. It appears in Nehemiah 1 and verse 1, I believe. It appears in the book of Daniel. Daniel was here on the river Ulai, remember in his book, at Shushan or Susa the palace. which is the Median area is here, the Persian area is here, and the Persians have the supremacy in the kingdom right now. In the 3rd year of his reign. Now he began in 486, so we're talking about 483, which, you got that as Vashti's time on your chart. The 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast. Why? See, I can tell you why. But if someone just opens their Bible, well, a feast is a feast is a feast, not Xerxes' feast. Unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, which shows this is no ordinary feast here. This is no birthday party for either himself or for his soon-to-be deposed Queen Vashti. The nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom. Sounds like Nebuchadnezzar, boasting about all that he has and all that he's done. And the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. And they ran out of wine at the marriage feast over in John 2 in a matter of hours. 180 days. And when those days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white, green, blue hangings fastened with cords of linen, and purple, the royal color, to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black and marble. They gave them drink in vessels of gold. No 2 snowflakes were alike, neither were Xerxes' vessels, and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. The drinking was according to the law, none did compel. For so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. And also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. Then from verse 10 through verse 22 we go on to have the sad story of the deposing of Vashti. Now what's important thus far is the 3rd verse. In the 3rd year of the reign of Ahasuerus, he throws this tremendous feast. And this is the year 483. Well, let me begin telling you the story about Xerxes and his attempted conquest of Greece. You'll see how right and how important the Bible and its historical statements really are. In the 3rd year of Xerxes, according to the writings of Herodotus, who's not trying to prove that the Bible is right by any stretch of anyone's imagination. He doesn't even know about the Bible. The 3rd year of the reign of Xerxes, he began making extensive plans for an invasion of mainland Greece. And this is the whole background to Ezra chapter 1. If you don't know this, you just open and you read that and you try to get some spiritual lesson or message. And they don't come till later on in the book. What are you going to get out of this first verse? Being good certainly doesn't pay. You couldn't get that out of the first chapter, because Vashti doesn't do a skin dance before all the nobles and she's deposed from queen as a result of that. What are you going to get out of this? Well, the whole history behind this, and you see, people know about this. Greek historians, I'm talking about professors in colleges and universities today, know this without knowing anything about the book of Esther. And I find it very interesting to understand what's going on here, that in the 3rd verse, in 483, after he's been king 3 years, after he's put down a revolt in Egypt and then put down a revolt, a small one in Egypt and a small one in Babylon, he now, just like one of his predecessors that we discussed before, is making, but more so than him, extensive plans for an invasion of mainland Greece. Now, it had been tried once before by Darius Hystaspes, and he had been soundly defeated at the naval battle of Marathon in 490. We're talking about 486, just 4 years later, in 490 BC. And he starts here, 483, he begins making his plans. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that this was a banquet, a feast, to kick off his preparations that took 2 years. Extensive preparations with his scouts and everything. and the fortifying of the army, and certainly the fortifying of the navy, because the navy had just lost a few years prior to this. In the naval battle of Marathon, there was a partial land battle, but it was primarily thought of and to this day remembered as the naval battle of Marathon, just a few miles northeast of the Greek city of Athens. When the navy was so soundly defeated, you've got to build your navy back up. So he's making extensive preparations and designs to do this. But you're not just going to wake up one day and say, I think it's a good idea to invade Greece, let's start planning today. No, if you're an arrogant, extravagant king like this, you're going to throw a great feast and invite everyone and tell your plans to them, which is what chapter 1 is all about, telling his plans, gathering together the men that he needs to make these preparations. All this is done in 483. Around 481, he leaves with an army, we'll discuss the size of it here in a moment, from Susa or Shushan and begins to travel in this direction. From Shushan, traveling in this direction. Which brings us to another map, which is the one we'll use primarily. He arrives in the capital of Lydia. Now remember, we discussed Lydia and how Lydia, which formerly belonged to the Greeks, fell to the Persians. The Greeks tried to take it over again. They actually burned the capital once, and some people believe that the work that was done on the Acropolis in Athens by Xerxes was in retaliation to what the Greeks had done to the capital of Lydia after it had fallen to the Persians, which capital is the city of Sardis, S-A-R-D-I-S. Important for us in New Testament times. Why? Because it's one of the 7 assemblies in Asia Minor that received a letter from the Apostle John as recorded in Revelation chapters 2 and 3. Important to me because my grandparents had a cabin on Sardis Lake, and I spent a lot of my boyhood days there, but it wasn't in Turkey, it was in Mississippi. In the winter of 481 and 480, remember we're counting backwards because we're BC years, the winter of 481 AD, Ahasuerus with his magnificent troops behind him arrives in Sardis, Lydia, and there determines to spend the winter. Now let me mention again what I just mentioned before. He spent his first 2 years, 485, 484, putting down a minor revolt in Egypt and one in Babylon. But that's not important. He's not remembered for that, and that's not remembered when he is spoken of. He gathered soldiers from 50 nations. That's not surprising because remember Esther 1:1. He controlled so much of the world of that day. All of the Middle East he controlled. Obviously, since Israel is in the Middle East, not a lot of time is spent talking about Alaska or Hawaii in the Bible. It obviously is going to talk about the land that's important with regard to the people of God. And it's still going to be important. It's important today and it will be in the future. He gathers soldiers from 50 nations. He has 29 Persian generals, which command a fleet of ships and men. The men, according to Herodotus, totaling 3 million men. But don't ooh or ah too much. No doubt that's a boastful exaggeration to make your own victory over the Persians look better. Remember the various ways we told you back in textual criticism how you can make an educated guess concerning which text is right and which text is wrong. You can't just say, well, I've got the original text. You've got one that's shorter and one that's longer. Which one's going to be right? We told you which one, probably, and why. There are good reasons behind it. Now, some people erroneously might think, well, what Herodotus, who was a Greek historian, who obviously came afterwards, what Herodotus would do, he would inflate the Greek forces and deflate the others to make his own nation look more populous. Not if you're going to be the winner, because then the battle doesn't look so significant after all. If you can inflate the number, falsely so, of your attackers and deflate your own, you look like it's, 10 to 100, the battle takes on higher significance. 3 million people? Hardly. No one knows exactly. But a British archaeologist, not that long ago, traced out the exact route We know this from history of Xerxes or Ahasuerus. And he estimated that the army probably could not contain any more than maybe 300,000 men. A lot of men, yes, but a long shot from 3 million. The water supply would only be enough for 300,000 men. And let's not forget the donkeys and horses and mules, everything else you have to count in there. You've got to have a lot of water. You know that I just got back from the Mediterranean world not long ago, here just a few days ago, and I remember, when I was over there, I got thinking, traveling where various places that I did travel, I got thinking about what we had taught you a long time ago in Old Testament introduction about when Moses, hit the rock and water came out, or when he spoke to the rock. People's idea is a little drinking fountain. Everyone, that was my idea, that was your idea, everyone's idea. You don't think of anything else. I got thinking about what we had taught you a long time ago in Old Testament introduction about when Moses, hit the rock and water came out, or when he spoke to the rock. People's idea is a little drinking fountain. Everyone, that was my idea, that was your idea, everyone's idea. You don't think of anything else. And then someone tells you, but 3 million people had to drink. And so the average person thinks 3 million, that's like, a big number. And so you all run in front of it real quickly and get a quick drink. And you need to sit down and calculate, and people have, how long it'd take if you spent only 5 seconds there for 3 million people to walk in front of that. Crossing the Red Sea, what was it? Well, single file. Of course it was single file. They don't realize it'd take days and days for 3 million people, not counting all these animals, the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt, to walk across the Red Sea. There had to be several hundred or several thousand abreast to get over in one night. What do the critics say? Well, that never happened. Or if it did, it was just a little small body of water, like a little stream or something. Even there, it doesn't matter if you're talking about the Atlantic Ocean or a stream. If it's single file, it's single file. And it's going to take so much time. And seeing the lack of water over there, then these things aren't insignificant. And you can determine the strength of an army. Whenever it's just your family traveling somewhere, you don't need much water. But when you're with 300,000 people, you can drink a pond dry. Think of the animals that are going to stick their heads in there. So you can find out, are we talking about 3 million? Are we talking about 300,000? That's just one of many things that is good to know as you study so many things in the Bible. Or you get these false concepts of everyone drinking a little bit from that little spout in the rock. It was a river that gushed out of there. They weren't all standing in line. It was a river that flowed out of there, and you all got down by the river and drank. I saw where Gideon's 300 men drank while I was gone. That was interesting, thinking of where people drink. But yeah, you'd have to be down drinking out of the river. You're not going to be passing Dixie cups around from the fountain. 3 million men, hardly, Herodotus. That sounds good for your side, because then you, with your 15 women, defeated 3 million men. That sounds good. Perhaps 200, perhaps 300,000 men. Now, let's get back to where we were. They've marched this way. Here's Sardis. Now, the writing is small, but you can certainly see the area. We're talking about Asia. We're talking about Asia Minor. Today, we're talking about the country of Turkey. And here is Sardis. An important city then. It's not that important today, but it was an important city then. Here, he winters 480 with 300,000 men. After the spring rains have passed, in the month of May, 480 BC, he heads toward the Hellespont and crosses on a bridge of boats built by the Phoenicians, which is in this direction. Here's the Hellespont, famous primarily when Alexander crossed it. Got its name from the Greeks and not from the Persians, obviously. It's also known as the Dardanelles, Dardanelles. Today it's referred to as the Dardanelles rather than the Hellespont, which separates the Marmara Sea, M-A-R-M-A-R-A, the Marmara Sea from the Aegean Sea. Technically, this is the Bosporus Straits, which separates the Black Sea from the Marmara Sea, or which separates really, and really it's true today. Turkey really goes to about right here today, but be that as it may, which separates Asia. Turkey is recognized to this day as a part of Asia from Europe. Remember, the Apostle Paul is crossing in this same area. He's not crossing the Hellespont. He's not crossing the Bosphorus Straits, but he is crossing from, over there in Acts chapter 16, he is crossing from Asia. The gospel heads in this direction into Europe. So Xerxes crosses. Now the navy, he has his navy with him as well. Now this is a symbol. The boats were assembled by the Phoenicians here. The Dardanelles, or the Hellespont, ranges anywhere from 3/4 of a mile to 4 miles wide. Now again, talking about 300,000 men, you can't put them in an aluminum fishing boat and run a couple of them over there at a time. You'll never get across. It'll take weeks to get across, because what happened, they lined boats up, tied them together with huge cords, huge ropes, 18 inches in circumference. One of these was found in an Egyptian quarry. These were made in Egypt. He had them ordered from Egypt, and they were carried up there before they even got there. But you've got to have the boats tied together. We're crossing anywhere from 3/4 of a mile to 4 miles. Obviously, they're going to pick the 3/4 of a mile if that is at the right place for them, which it wasn't. We're talking more like about 2 miles, which is a long way. To have boats, like a flat barge, a pontoon-type boat, boats tied together side by side to march the army across, 7 days and 7 nights. It took the 300,000 men with all the animals, with all the food supply, with all of the wagons, with all of the baggage, with all of the weapons, with all that they had with them, 7 days and 7 nights to cross. Now, as I said, one of these ropes, not one that was used there, but a comparable one, has been found in Egypt that was 18 inches in circumference, that when new had a breaking point of 75 tons. You ever seen a rope? You ever seen these cables that anchor these huge ocean liners in? Huge things. Again, our concept of things, if you grow up in one area or you just study the Bible and you don't study anything else, is so limited and so narrow compared to what it could be, which will help you learn more later on. Breaking point of 75 tons. So I think it's fair to say that these cables could well have held these ships together, these flat-bottomed barges or whatever they were together, which were built by the Phoenicians, which, remember, we know from the Old Testament were master shipbuilders. Solomon got some of his help on the temple from the Phoenicians. Why? They were expert carvers and makers in wood. So again, you know that from the Bible. Again, history bears it out. So he crosses the Hellespont. The navy, which as I said has been built down here, which is anchored outside Sardis in the Aegean Sea, makes its way around with a land army. We're headed towards Athens here, the capital of Greece at this time. Makes its way around, hugging the shore, obviously for reasons of navigation. We're talking about centuries, millennia ago in shipping, and you didn't just strike out on the open seas, even like we have 500 years later in the days of Paul, where you just sail across the Mediterranean Sea. Even though the Navy was here, the Navy is not going to sail straight across here. They're going to go this way because you have to keep making stops for water and food and so forth, as well as to keep in contact with the land army. So by the early part of August, now these are fairly educated statements that I'm making. I mean, they're fairly reliable. That he takes off after the spring rains, which we know is in May, and it probably hasn't changed that much from then until now. And you can calculate the time it's going to take for them to go from one place to another. And so they end up, we're talking about the land army, in Salonika, referred to generally then as Therma, and you know it better as Thessalonica, which is right here. Now this is the land army coming over, with which we find Xerxes. Now remember before we talked about Darius, that Darius Hystaspes, just like Ahasuerus is going to, Darius Hystaspes had also made an attempt, once he got over there in Asia Minor, No one had ever attempted, no one in the Achaemenid line of Persian kings had ever attempted actually taking mainland Greece. And it got close enough by getting over in western Turkey, in Asia Minor. Darius Hystaspes got close enough for him to be tempted. Why not try to take mainland Greece? Which he did, which he failed to do in the Battle of Marathon. But before we get to the Battle of Marathon in 490, I said something drastically went wrong with his naval plans. Remember what happened? A storm caught him and his navy at sea. Of the 600 ships, he lost 300. Of the 40,000 men on board, obviously, if you lost half the ships, you lose half the men. 20,000 men. Where did that happen? Off the Cape of Athos, A-T-H-O-S, because you see these three fingers right here? Right on the tip of this easternmost finger is Mount Athos, 6,667 feet high. And because you've got a mountain located close to the sea, in that proximity, it can cause turbulent weather there. And this is exactly where Darius lost half of his fleet. So what's Xerxes going to do? You're not going to attempt that again. You can't be guaranteed there's not going to be a storm the time you choose to go around. Well, brilliant enough, they dug a canal right through here to keep from having to go around the Cape of Athos. And so the sayings that the classical writers wrote later of marching over the sea and sailing through the land weren't just products of megalomania, but of necessity. They marched over the sea, where? At the Hellespont, the Dardanelles. They sailed through the land, the peninsula of Athos. They camp out in Salonika, Therma, or Thessalonica, so that the land army can be met there in the bay by the navy, and so that all can await the reply of heralds sent forth to the various city-states in mainland Greek demanding peace. In showing peace, Xerxes required a sample of land, earth, dirt, soil, and a sample of water from your area, which symbolizes your surrender of your territory to him. While waiting at Salonika, a large number of the northern city-states surrendered, and along with the heralds they sent their reply of a sample of earth and a sample of water. But what about Attica? What about the Peloponnese? Well, Sparta, Corinth, Athens would rather fight than surrender. So in August of 480, the beginning of August 480, this huge army of the Persians sets out marching towards Attica. Athens and Sparta finally resolve all of their little petty difficulties between themselves and join together, as does the remaining city-states in Greece. Now at the beginning, Thrace and Macedonia, Thrace particularly, already belonged to the Persians. They had inside spies in Athens and in Corinth. Part of the province of Macedonia already was in the hands of the Persians through the work of some of the earlier kings, not Ahasuerus. So primarily we're talking about central and southern Greece, with the important cities working from the southernmost to the northernmost, Sparta, Corinth, and Athens. So in the beginning of the battle, the war, the Greeks lost heavily. 10,000 men were lost who had been sent to guard the Vale of Tempe. I'm going to show you a little geography here. 10,000 Greeks from Athens had been sent to guard the Vale of Tempe, because if you could block the advance of the Persian army here, well, you could hold them for a long period of time. Now the navy, of course, is following beside in the water, hugging the shore, the land detachments of Xerxes. We'll get to them here in a moment. But all along, they've been here at Thessalonica. There's a narrow strip of land. Most places where you've got land, you're going to have, anywhere from a mile to several miles of coastline. In Israel, it's known as the Maritime Plains. You're going to have coastline right here. Greece is a very mountainous country, and you're just not going to march 300,000 people over mountains very easily. The mountains extend down to about right here. They pick up again and extend all the way down. Now, since the army has been coming in this direction, and they're right along here, there's nowhere to go. I mean, you can retreat and go back. You can't go into the sea, which would be to your left. You can't go over the mountains, which would be to your right. But you can keep marching down to the Vale of Tempe, which is a mountain pass that let these 300,000 men through. So right here, you see this indentation into the land right here? Right there is the Vale of Tempe. 10,000 Greeks were sent to stop the advance of the Persian army, which they failed to do, and 10,000 of them were lost. In the second place, 10,000 men were sent under Leonidas, who is a famous Spartan general. When he died, they even referred to him as the king of Sparta when he died. But a famous Spartan general controlled 10,000 men sent to defend the Thermopylae Pass. Now, can I reminisce for a moment and remember my first semester in college? I remember we covered all of these things, and one word, one battle I never forgot was the Battle of the Thermopylae Pass. I could even spell it down to this day without looking it up. The Battle of Thermopylae Pass. Thermopylai. The Battle of Thermopylae Pass. Where is that? Well, we come all the way down to here. You've got mountains along here. They've escaped these two barriers of mountains by coming out into the plain area. But now you've got another ridge of mountains here that's going to block you from coming down here into Attica, down into southern Greece. They're not even headed to the Peloponnese. You can forget about that. They're headed to Attica, to southern Greece, the Achaia area. It's known as Attica. This area is known as Attica or Achaia. Achaia is just a larger term, a larger area. But you've got mountains here, and there's a pass between them known as Thermopylae Pass. Very romantic stories about all of this, and the bravery and the heroism that was shown by the 900 Spartans that were part of the 10,000 Greeks, all of which were under Leonidas, and Leonidas as well, him being a Spartan, as the general in control of these 10,000 men, but particularly his loyal 900 fighting Spartans, which were known as fighting machines. And they had the pass guarded. You might think 300,000 is a lot against 10. But let's say you're fighting in a passageway of 10 feet wide. Then 10,000 men can do a lot of damage to 300,000. You just sit there and wait. When they come by, you just pick them off with arrows or spears or hand combat with swords, with whatever. You're not going to get past. There's just no way to it. And they don't get past. And so there's a stalemate there for a short period of time until a local Greek man betrays his country and informs the Persians, who are marching under their general known as Mardonius, Mardonius. Mardonius. Xerxes is the commander-in-chief. We've got 29 Persian generals, but the chief one of the land forces is Mardonius. He sells out to the Persians, and under the light of the moon, he shows to the Persians a secret pass over the mountains that goes above the Thermopylae Pass. The Persians had no way of knowing this. So the next day, the 10,000 Greeks under Leonidas, which includes the 900 Spartans who are fighting under him, see that they have the Persians behind them now. They pass through the secret pass that only the Greeks knew. It was a valley, but you had to go a certain way. And a local man betrayed them and showed the Persian army this passageway over them by moonlight, and they found out the next day it was too late. There's no way the 10,000 are going to defeat the 300,000 now. So Leonidas and the other Spartans, with all of their bravery, allow all the others to leave and to run, which they do. But someone has to stay behind to give them a head start to get back to Athens. And of course, Leonidas and the 900 Spartans choose to do that, and they all die down to the very last man. Famous battle of heroism. It's been thought of that since then. Meanwhile, the Navy has fought its way past Artemisium. Artemisium is right here. They had sent several score Greek ships to hold them back. They passed through the canal they built. They harbored here in Thessalonica or Therma or Salonika while they're waiting for the reply of the heralds. They come down here, Artemisium. They have a naval battle here. They're successful. They're going to continue their way, and they're still headed to Athens. That's what we're attempting to get to, because that's what's so important. Then we'll get back to the book of Esther and show where it picks up just where we left it. By the end of August, Xerxes has reached Athens. He sacks the city, and he burns the temples on the Acropolis. Victory, total victory, seems to be in the hands of Xerxes. The Greeks have lost at the Vale of Tempe. They've lost at Thermopylae Pass. They've lost a naval battle at Artemisium. They have lost the greatest city to this day, the country of Greece, great city of Athens. The temples of the Acropolis had been burnt, portions torn down. But Xerxes wasn't satisfied, and here's where he makes his mistake. He wanted to wrap things up in his campaign by destroying the entire Greek fleet. Remember, the Greeks had soundly defeated them at Marathon before, and so perhaps he had revenge in the back of his mind. The Greek fleet was half his size and was stationed off the little island of Salamis. S-A-L-A-M-I-S. Salamis. Which this map doesn't show. If you've got a map in the back of your Bible, you could look it up. It's a tiny island right here that's right across from the port of Piraeus. P-I-R-A-E-U-S. You see, Athens is not right on the sea. Athens is a little bit inland. Piraeus is the port. Remember, Corinth has a port, Cenchrea, that we read about when you talk about Phoebe over in, I think, Romans 16. Here's Corinth, and Corinth has a port, Cenchrea. Athens has a port, Piraeus. But you have a little island here, which name is Salamis, and the name of the city on the island is Salamis as well. Xerxes is sitting, you see, I wish I had a blown up map of this, it looks so small, but you've got, a land mass that sticks out here, and then this harbor of Piraeus, which is a harbor of Athens that goes in, and out in front of that, you've got a little island of Salamis. So anyway, Xerxes is perched upon a high hill here in Attica, right beside Athens, sitting on his throne, watching in preparation for the naval battle to begin to unfold. September the 27th and the 28th, 480 BC, the Persians engaged the Greeks while Xerxes sat on a throne overlooking the harbor to watch in naval battle. And the plans of the Greek leader Themistocles worked. I don't want to go into all of those plans. That gets a little too technical, but they had some Corinthian ships that were going to make a feigned retreat that was supposed to draw part of the Persians away, which it did, and then they were to return and fight, and various battle plans worked out by Themistocles. They worked. The Persians in this naval battle, the Battle of Salamis in 480, were soundly defeated. The aggression of the Persian Empire has been broken, and its end is soon to come. This really is what paves the way. This battle is one of the most important naval battles in all of history, is the Battle of Salamis. It's more important than Marathon. It's more important than Marathon, because Xerxes, as opposed to Darius Hystaspes, had gotten so much further. So in one of the greatest naval battles, and most decisive, it changed the course of history. You see, if the Persians would have defeated the Greeks, we wouldn't have Greek words, we wouldn't have Greek ways of life, we wouldn't have gymnasiums, we wouldn't have all of this stuff then. The Persians would have taken over Greece, and then maybe taken over Italy. And then it would, instead of having Europe as we think of it today, Europe would be like, where's Persia today? Iran and Iraq. And you think of Iran and Iraq as being different. The people there, the culture there, the way of life, their beliefs, they're different. They're not as civilized in some regards, in many regards. They're not as civilized as people in Spain and Portugal and Greece. What if Persia had taken that over? Then Iran and Iraq today would not only be where it is today. It'd be in Greece, it'd be in Turkey, and perhaps it'd be all over Europe, perhaps it'd be in North America, and the speculation just goes on and on. That's why I'm saying not only important, but one of the most decisive for world history, naval battles, is the Battle of Salamis. So they're not difficult to remember. The Battle of Marathon, it's not a long race of 26 miles, and it's not a candy bar. Caramel inside and chocolate on the outside. It is a naval battle, 490. 10 years later, and Darius Hystaspes lost. 10 years later, 480, Xerxes loses at the Battle of Salamis. 490, 480. I never have forgotten them. They're fairly easy to remember. What about the land forces? Well, of course, he still has his land forces. A year later, in 479, they are defeated 9 miles south of Thebes. All of this is in Attica, somewhere in this general area. A place called Plataea, Plataea. The Battle of Plataea, this is really the last battle. Mardonius, the Persian generals, defeated by the plans of the Greek leader Themistocles. That brings an end for all practical purposes. Now we're going to have, more Persian kings to cover, but no longer is Asia a threat to Europe. Now with that in mind, in conclusion, turn back to the book of Esther. Now we know what chapter 1 is about. 483, according to verse 3, we know what this is about. All of this feast and all of this concerns the preparation for this little history lesson that I've just given you about the naval battle of Salamis in 480. September the 27th to the 28th, 480 BC. That's what this is about. That didn't happen in a vacuum and you read it and you don't know what's going on. You can do it that way, but it didn't happen that way. There's something behind this. Now look at chapter 2. After these things, after what things? After Xerxes had lost the war. Then what are you going to do? Go back and get in bed with all your female friends to comfort you. You won't comfort in love and affection when you've just lost the world. And Herodotus even tells us that Xerxes, this is exactly what he did. He retired to his harem of wives, and he was not heard of again in world history. Now, for Israel, of course, he is heard of again with the deliverance of them and the Feast of Purim and so forth. But he passes off the scene. He's well known. He's written about in these early years the put down of Egypt, the put down of Babylon, now the defeat at the hands of Themistocles in Greece. Why not heard of after that? He retires to his harem, and we know what this is all about in chapter 2. He's going to pick a new queen. He finds comfort and solace with his harem, and he's not heard of anymore. That is what chapter 2 is all about. After these things, after what things? Just what you read in chapter 1? No. We've got 3 years in between chapter 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 1 is 483. Chapter 2 is the very end of 480, the beginning of 479. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. Now, if that's all you had, you think that all that verse 1 of chapter 2 is referring to is just the events of chapter 1. Vashti, because it mentions her by name here. Do we know what this is about? The king's servants that ministered to him said, "Let there be fair young virgins sought for the king." Why is he pouting? Just because you lost Vashti, who's no good anyway. He's not pouting over that. He just lost the world. It was right within his grasp. If he would have stopped at Athens, he had the city, the capital. And he took one more step to try to completely defeat the navy. And the odds were 2-1 stacked in his favor. And he lost. And so when you go back home, you don't start making new plans. You get your palm leaves out and your grapes and your beautiful women and say, forget the world. I'm going to enjoy life now for a while. Which he does until he dies. He's murdered in 464 by one of his lieutenants or generals. Someone's always murdering someone in history, in the Bible. He dies, he's murdered in 464.